Fox 17 Rockin' Review. I've got my good friend here, Hartley Peavey. He is the founder and CEO of Peavey Electronics Corp. You know, you've really been a visionary, you know, on this, Hartley. We were talking about that you built your first amp in 1957. You worked for your father in the music store. You started Peavey back in 1960. And, you know, we were talking earlier with some of the guys here in the studio. A lot of us started out playing your amplifiers.
Well, you know, I started out, I wanted to be a rock star. I went to see Bo Diddley, and I went back and told my dad, who was a music dealer, he was a saxophone player. I told him I wanted to play rock and roll, and he said, no, you don't want to do that. Guitar players don't pay their bills. I probably should have listened to him, but the reality is, on the way, I found out what my real talents were, and my talents are not playing music, but my talent was building things.
Right.
And the first thing I started out with was simple guitar amplifiers. Then I started building, you know, sound systems, what we used to call PA systems.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't get speakers, so I started building speakers. And then we started building tube amps and big stacks and mixing boards and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and even with the guitars on it too, Hartley, your company, your vision to where you were one of the first to actually start doing the computer controlled with the cutting of the guitar bodies.
When I got involved in the guitar business, you know, I had been through the Fender factory and I'd been through the Gibson factory, and I knew that wasn't the way to do it. So I decided that I would use computer controlled machines to cut the body out, and with one guy, one 8-hour shift, we could do over 230 guitars and about 200 bass bodies because the bass was bigger and it had more lineal. So we've always done things different, and that's kind of my nature. You know, in the guitar business, people, a lot of the leaders, you know, spend a lot of time about trying to recreate the glories of the past. I mean, you know, how many times can you reintroduce a particular guitar?
Well, I think what I really admire about you, and also with reading the book, you know, which I think, you know, your history is still ongoing with Peavey, but it's like you've always looked ahead, you've always built ahead. Like you said, you build your amps so well to where you don't want to see them again.
I do not want to see them again. But you know, I've learned over the past 48 years, when we buy components, nobody ever comes in to me selling capacitors or tubes or, you know, resistors and say, well, our stuff is not so good, but you ought to buy some. It's always, ours is the best there is, and the only way you can find it out is to use some of them. And over the years, we found out who we can depend on and who can't, because I can have the best design in the world. If it has lousy parts, it's not going to hold up.
Right.
So when a customer brings a Peavey product back to me, then that requires work, and I'd rather him be happy.
Totally.
Because if it goes out in somebody's living room, that's one thing, but if it goes out in front of 300 or 400 or 3,000 or 4,000 people, well, that's a whole different thing else. So over the years, we've kind of had the opportunity to watch our competitors and see what they have done and try not to make those mistakes. And actually, I kind of look at it like this. Business is like a rodeo. The one that wins is the one that can stay on the pony the longest.
I think that's a good point.
Well, I've been on this pony for 48 years.
Well, you know, that's what we were talking about when I first met you at the NAMM show, to where, you know, soon you're going to be coming up on 50 years as a company. And, you know, I think what's very impressive to me, and as a musician also, is that, you know, you've also reached out and embraced companies like Composite Acoustic Guitars, like Buddha, like Trace Elliott. You're now doing Buddha guitar pedals. You know, you're not resting on your laurels.
No, I had a very simple goal. I wanted to be the best, and by definition, you can't be the best unless you're different.
Right.
So our future is not building 10,000 different versions of the same thing. Our future is doing new things. Like we got involved in digital audio networking back in the early 90s, and now airports, you know, theme parks all over the world, cruise ships.
That's amazing.
And nobody said, you know, hey, you ought to do this. And people have asked, well, why do you? And the pretty simple answer is because we can.
Right.
Because knowledge, thank God, is like, it's kind of like radiation. It's cumulative.
Well, you know, and you and I were talking also, and I think it's very admirable as well, Hartley, to where, you know, especially in Meridian, Mississippi, how many people you employ there, you know.
We've had 14,000 people flow through Peavey since we started. Some of them, you know, went on to other places. Some of them kind of crashed and burned, but I provided lots of jobs, lots of opportunities, and by the way, we're still doing that.
Well, I agree, and also lots of great products, because as I mentioned earlier, so many of us started, using your amplifiers and products and guitars, and now many of us still are. Particularly with like a classic 30 amplifier, you see studio musicians and people gigging out on tour with your amplifier still.
We have worked with people you've never heard of and some of the biggest superstars ever, and I get a chance to learn from all of them. And believe me, I've been in school a long time.
Well, you know what the funny thing is, Hartley, every time you and I talk together, I feel like I'm getting schooled on the amplifiers and the tubes and everything, and I really appreciate it. And I'd recommend everybody, check out the new Peavey products, the composite acoustic, the Buddha, Trace Elliott, everything at your local music stores and online. And this is definitely not the Peavey company that you started out with. I think it keeps getting better.
A lot of people think, that I was like I used to be. Somebody says, well, I remember, 30 years ago I played your amps and I wasn't too impressed. And I said, okay, I'll buy that. But let me ask you a question. How was your playing 30 years ago?
Not like it is today,
well,
right?
There you go.
You're right.
No, I've learned so many things to do and so many things not to do. And, they say experience is the great teacher, and if that's the case, I've been in the classroom longer than anybody I know.
Well, then you're going to have to promise me that down the road you'll eventually come back on the Rock and Review with me, and we'll talk about some of the new progress and everything else with Peavey.
Absolutely, because there's a lot going on.
I'm sure of it. Well, thank you so much, Hartley, and thank you for watching the Fox 17 Rock and Review.